Okay, so let's get started. Well, first of all, thank you for joining me again for another office hour. Uh, it is a pleasure to be here, with you, clarifying questions, showing different ways of getting things accomplished, sharing best practices. So, for those of you that haven't met me yet, my name is Andrew. I'm responsible for sharing best practices, how to use the channels, how to optimize the performance of your listings, right? So this is, I'm also responsible for training internally, training externally. So I'm very glad that you were able to join me today, right? So today we are going to be discussing Vrbo, how to sell more, and many optimization tips that if you're new to the channel, maybe many of this you don't know. If you're already using the channel, that's an opportunity for us to discuss, things that you're trying to accomplish. We're not able to do it, right? Or uh, share any best practices that we have, so that everybody can sell more, right? Oh, let's go over some of the things that I'm often asked. Is it recorded? Yes, it's always recorded, right? Again, people that already have been before on our office hours, it is recorded and we send the link to watch the webinar 24 hours later, right? So tomorrow you'll receive a link to watch the webinar. So in case you're not able to attend in person to the webinar, uh, in person, right? So to watch it in real time, you can always register and watch it later, right? So we run this webinars at noon Eastern time because it's the biggest intersection, of time zones that we have. Um, here. So I apologize if it's an inconvenient time for you, but then I recommend you just record, and watch it later. All right. So automatically record. You don't have to record. Just register yourself and you receive the link, right? Or I can also show another way of getting the link, and watch it later. We have a page on the user guide that you can go there, even without any registration and watch even previous ones, right? So this is a practical session, right? So we have no intention of deep diving in theory here. Of course, we like to discuss the reason why some of the things happen, the way they happen, but that's not the main objective, right? Even though I'm all open, if you want to talk anything about short-term rental, by all means, right? So I'm into that, right? But the main objective of this session is to go over doubts, is how to get things done, right? So we are going to discuss quickly if you have questions, of course, we go over that. But the most important part that I want you to take advantage is, okay, how do we get this done? Using Hostaway, right? So I believe that's why most of you are here, and that's the feedback that I get, right? So people like to learn, okay, so you're talking about this. How do I take advantage of that using the software, right? So this is the main goal of this hour, all right? So not only the recording is being sent after, you can schedule a call with one of our CSMs or just request assistance. We have different ways to assist, right? And I'll show you soon how to get help, right? In case you're still wondering or if you haven't used yet, right? So the idea here is to take the best, everything that you can from Hostaway in order to perform better with your sales, right? With your bookings in general. So please, I encourage you to post your questions on the Q&A so that we can go over that. Maybe your question is the same question that someone else's and vice versa, right? So this makes everything more engaging, more active, and more real, if you bring real cases and real questions, as you always do, right? For those of you that always come, right? I usually address the ones that are here for the first time, but I know that many of you, come here every week, which I admire because it means that you are always finding an edge, to improve. There is always something that can be improved on the listings. We know that, right? And especially on the performance, right? So it's a competitive market, and we all want to be there, at our best. So let's get started. Vrbo Premier Host, right? So why am I bringing that? Because if you're optimizing, we are going into one direction, right? So first, we have to understand, okay, what is considered optimal by the channel, right? Each channel will have a different ways to measure that. So I brought this one for Vrbo, but in general, they're not too different, right? So there you will not find something that contradicts, anything that is, promoted and recommended by a different channel, right? For example, cancellation rate, right? So if your cancellation rate is too high, something is wrong, and every channel will tell you that, right? On score wise, right? So they're not going to tell you in words, but the algorithm will help you, or will play against you, right? So we have to make sure that we understand what are the channel goals so that we can work accordingly, right? And optimize and take advantage of that, right? So in order to get Premier Host, you need at least 5 bookings or 60 book nights, inquiry acceptance, right? So this one, not too much under your control, even though I can show you some things that we have here in place, that can be used. But this is more related to operations, right? So inquiry acceptance, right? A booking acceptance rate of 95% or higher. I have many clients that when they are onboarded here at Hostaway, they said, yeah, I only want to request to book. I don't want instant bookable because I want to screen the guest, this and that for different reasons. Just keep in mind, the acceptance, that you have will count in your favor or against you, right? So it's not just, oh, I'm just screening, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's not exactly like that, that the algorithm thinks. Because if you're promoting your listing, you want to get booked, right? So if you're rejecting bookings, then the algorithm may play against you, saying that, well, this host is not sure, right? If they want to accept too many inquiries. And not only that, you always have to think as a guest, right? Are you giving a good experience, to the guest that is expecting to book your property and stay at your property? Not really, right? Someone was counting on the stay and you just rejected, right? So, of course, it is your business. You have to make decisions, but take that into consideration. It's going to affect your performance. Number of reviews, having at least 3 reviews or more. Yes, reviews, they play a very, very important part on any channel, right? So that's expected. We have many tools for that, and we keep adding more and more and more, so that that can be a very well managed part of your business, right? We know that this is it's one of the fundamental parts, of the guest experience is watching someone else's experience, right? That happens on short-term rental, it happens in business, it happens everywhere. And we have good tools for that, excellent tools, as a matter of fact. Cancellation rate, right? Again, so we were talking of inquiry acceptance, but we also have the cancellation rate, right? So owner initiated cancellation rate, right? Why is this terminology being used? When you're using Hostaway, you have different ways of canceling the reservation, right? So you can cancel a reservation because the guest initiated, maybe the guest couldn't make to your property, so they will not be able to check in, but that's a guest initiated, right? So the guest didn't complete the payment, right? So then, or their credit card failed, the last pay, whatever. So you can mark that you cancel the reservation, and it was guest initiated, right? So it's not going to penalize you. That's the main point of it, right? So if you just decide because you didn't plan very well, okay, that's going to count against your targets, right? Your goals. And then respond, 90% of your messages within 24 hours, right? So again, this is doable, right? I'm just showing you here, that everything here is doable, right? So main objective is, okay, let's go and let's become a Vrbo Premier Host, everyone, right? Here, and that is using Hostaway, right? That would be my goal, right? So everything here is possible, and we have many tools for that, right? Going to spend more time, when we go to the dashboard, right? In a couple of minutes, we go there, right? So new listing promotion. Remember, I was telling you, okay, this one is not too much related to operation, but have at least 5 bookings, because the beginning is very difficult, right? So let's say maybe you were using Airbnb, were not using Vrbo, and you just joined Hostaway because you would like to start using Vrbo in a more professional way. Maybe you were using iCalls or things like that, but you want to use with the API. So what we recommend, and everything that I'm telling you here, that I recommend, I mean, this is part of conversations between Hostaway and Vrbo, Hostaway, Airbnb, Hostaway, and Booking. So yes, we get a lot of feedback from the channels, and they keep sending us information. Hey, you have clients that are missing this, clients that are missing that, right? So sometimes even risking being repetitive, some of the things are just feedback that we get from the channels on how to optimize, because it is a win-win game, right? So if you get more reservations, that's incredible for the channels as well, right? So it's very easy to get this information, and they have all the intention, to have you very successful here. And so do we, right? So our slogan is your success is our success. So if you don't perform well, it means that I'm not doing my job very well. So new listing promotion, that's a very important one to get traction, right? So let's say you just created the listing, you're creating a listing, or you're just integrating, using the API. I'm going to show you on the dashboard. We have a way to promote your listings. And why is that important? Because when you create a listing, your listing doesn't have any reviews, right? So for from the guest perspective, it's like, is that listing even real? It is a beautiful house. I can see beautiful pictures here. And it has an excellent location. How come they don't have reviews, right? So that's why we have the new listing promotion, right? It is a way to inform the guest, potential guest, right? Someone that is browsing, looking for a place to stay, that this is a new listing. So that's important information, right? That's why you don't have reviews. So that becomes more explicit, to the guest, right? So you get a badge as a new, you will be promoted. So you receive a boost, on your listing to promotion, right? So the algorithm will boost your position, on searches, so the guests can book your property, right? And they will feel confident because, okay, it is a new. That's why you don't have a review yet, right? So this is the start, just to get traction, on it, right? And then what helps you is the algorithm on the long term. It's going to look for your success, right? So listings that show and convert, they're always preferred by the channel, right? If you're just displayed and you don't convert, it means that, okay, maybe I will show, the software will think, maybe it is best to show a different listing, right? That will convert better, right? And we don't want that, right? We want to be those on the top, right? That every time they're showed, to the guests, they get booked, right? So it is the win-win scenario. You don't want to be on the lose-lose, side of things, right? So once you're building that, right? So with that help, then you get traction, right? Because then you get the reviews, that's your opportunity to get the performance, right? So don't miss that, right? How do you do that? Actually, I have a screenshot here. Don't even have to show you. I can show you on the dashboard, but you click on export, from channel manager channels, Vrbo configure, and then you have to check this box. Add this listing to new listing promotion, right? And then you export. That's all you need to do, right? It's a very simple thing. Now, let's talk a little bit about instant booking available, right? So every channel recommends you to use instant bookable, right? And why is that? Because from the guest perspective, if they are ready to book, they don't want to ask questions or wait for you to answer if they can stay on a specific day, right? So if it is a question, it's something else, right? But if it is the intention to book, you're just creating an additional step for the guest to book your place, right? So as in every type of e-commerce, that's a barrier, right? So you're creating one step and you can lose, this potential guest in the funnel, right? So that's not a good business for the channel and not for you and not for guests, right? So long story short, if you don't, if you cannot apply instant bookable, at least accept, with a very high rate, right? You saw 95% at least of acceptance. So this is something to take into consideration, right? Not only that, this is also important. I already got some questions here about Expedia, right? Yeah. So it is, I'm going to address that because then you can watch, Vrbo with different eyes. In case you don't know, uh, Vrbo and Expedia, they belong to Expedia Holding, right? So there is a holding called Expedia, and there is Expedia, the channel, and Vrbo, the channel that belong to this holding. If you try to open your property and you inform on Expedia, right, and you inform that you're using short-term rental, this is your business, very likely you will be redirected to Vrbo. That's the reason why, right? Because they belong to the same holding. And then you're going to get information that we have a company that is specialized in short-term rental. And that's Vrbo, right? That's why we're here, right? So it's one of the biggest on short-term rental. So then if you use, and then comes the other part, can I be on Expedia? Yes. So if your listings do not qualify to Expedia, or even if they qualify, if you turn instant bookable on Vrbo, if there is a demand on Expedia, from a guest that is looking for a property that looks like yours, Expedia might display your property on their inventory, right? Because they are connected, they share inventory, right? So it will go through Vrbo, right? So your listing is published on Vrbo, and Expedia will display that information to the guest. Of course, assuming there is no other listing, on Expedia similar to yours, or whatever kind of search, that the guest made, right? So it will be up to Expedia to show on the final ad, right? So that's the way that is recommended to get the reservation on Expedia is through Vrbo. But the only way that you will show up there is allowing instant bookable, right? Because if you don't activate that, Expedia and Booking.com, they were designed for instant bookable, right? So this is the main one of the main features that they have, the way they were designed for hotels, right? So you don't book a hotel, in an inquiring way, right? So you usually book and it is confirmed. So there is no such a thing. It is confirmed or not confirmed. If you create a reservation on Booking or Expedia, it's automatically confirmed, right? So it is also recommended not only to perform better on the channels, because you can do the A/B test. You can leave one listing. Let's say you are not secure about so sure about using instant booking or not. You can do an A/B test. You can leave one listing on instant bookable and the other one not, similar listings, and see which one performs better. I can guarantee you that it's going to be the instant bookable, right? So people want to book, and also keep in mind, right, the market, right? So the booking window is becoming shorter and shorter, right? So it is a trend that the guests are leaving closer to the check-in day that they used to do it before, right? So you have to adapt with the market, right? So the market is like that. So if they're leaving to book their stay closer to the check-in, it means that when they decide to move, they need to move fast, right? So if it is an inquiry, it's not moving fast, right? Because then they have to wait for your answer, if you accept, if you don't accept, and then so they will very likely go for an instant bookable listing. Okay. Okay, I'm getting some questions here about cancellation policy. I'm gonna get there in a minute. Yeah, how to set that on okay, how to set instant bookable on Hostaway. Yes, I will show that. Okay, so some of the questions here I will address when we get to the dashboard. I'm just going to go over a quick overview here, and we go to the dashboard in a minute. All right. Okay. All right. So yeah, many of the questions better to address on the dashboard, right? Amenities, right? Again, many times I see a photo of a swimming pool, photos from the beach, photos that are like the main value of your listing, right? Because you have to keep in mind there is a reason, right? So you know that because you're in the business, you know why the guests are booking your place, right? But many times I see the photos and I don't see the amenity checked, right? What does it mean? It means that if someone goes to the channel, right? Because the guests, remember, right? The guests, they have an app or several apps. They have Vrbo, they have Airbnb, they have Booking, and then they will have their preferences, right? So we discussed last week about using multi-channels, right? So because we can be talking to different guests, and you have to take advantage of all of that, right? Some people have preferences for one specific channel, and that's all right. We don't want to miss them either, right? But if you don't check the amenity, what's going to happen is people will search for the city and then they will filter, right? So every guest has their preferences. And of course, you are all hosts, but you're also guests, right? So when you're on your trips, on your vacations, or traveling for business, you also have your filters like Wi-Fi, like if it is vacation, maybe you want to be by the lake, in the mountain, on the mountain, right? So uh, if you don't check the amenities, check the boxes, you're not going to show up on the filters, right? So please, please remember that. One of the most important ones. Amenities, I'm talking general, and we are going to see, some of them in details. Nearby locations. So, what can people do near your property, right? So this is very, very important, right? So we have even location type, like I was telling you about mountains, about beaches, but also what's the activities that you have, right? What are the attractions that you have? All that are super important, right? Don't underestimate that, please. Photo recommendation, that's a big one for Vrbo because it is, I don't remember any other channel that recommends 50 photos, right? So that's the recommendation from Vrbo. Put at least 50 photos. And why is that? Because then is when they consider that your listing is complete, right? Of information being provided. Why is so important? Because many guests, they like to browse the photos, right? Some of them, like I said, right, they filter the listings before they go to the photos. Some of them like to see the description. You have to make sure that you cover, you get everything covered, right? So there is no, oh, I took care of the photos. No, you have to take care of the photos, the descriptions and everything. And descriptions, we have AI to help you with that, right? So there are many, many tools here to help, right? So photos, take photos of any attractions, any natural beauty that you have around your property. If it is downtown, show the vibrant downtown, use high quality photos, take different angles. Don't take just one photo of the room, right? Take different angles of the room. Make the guests feel like, okay, how it's like to be in that room. Even bathroom, right? I always recommend bathroom because some guests, they want to make sure that they're taking their family to a place that has a decent bathroom, right? So they don't know your property. Remember that, right? So they only see the pictures, reading description, right? So plants, decoration, and right? The vibe of the place, all that but it's still some people forget to add a lot of photos, right? So don't be minimalist with the photos, right? So yeah, bring a lot, right? Because the guests will try to understand what it's like to stay at your property, right? Photos is the best way to do that, right? Cancellation policy. I got that question here from Nana. Thanks for the question, Nana. So there are many different ones. Of course, there is always the most restrictive ones, that probably you feel safer because then nobody can cancel. But at the same time, it has as a consequence, right? Less people will be willing to book, right? And on the other side of the spectrum is like, okay, be very loose so that more people will be willing to book. And somewhere in between, you have to find where is the sweet spot for you, right? And why is that important? Because many times I see some clients selecting the most strict one, and then just to realize that they don't have that many cancellations, right? So if they were more on the moderate side, right? So be careful not to be too strict and keep guests away, from booking your property. But I'm going to the dashboard in a minute. So flexible payment schedules, yeah. So ideally, I have many clients that they would prefer to get 100% at the moment that the reservation is created to get 100% of the payment, right, for the reservation. Is that possible? Well, it depends on your competition, right? So if your competitors are not doing that, very likely, the guests will refrain from booking you and booking someone else, right? Careful with that. Reviews, yeah, of course, we are going to reviews in minutes, right? So that's it. Enough, just some things, here important before we go to the dashboard, right? Okay, so someone asked me how to get the new listing promotion. From the channel manager, you go to listing mapping and then actually go to channels, and then on channels, you go to Vrbo configure, and then you click on export, right? As you can see, it will give like some additional information, what you need to know, good to know, and then you check this box and add this listing to new listing promotion, and then you export. That's how you activate that. That's simple, right? I got the question, can I use that for an existing listing? No, unfortunately not, right? So only when you're creating the listing, you can use that promotion, right? Now, let me go over, but thanks for the question. All right, so I'm going back here to a listing. Okay, one of the questions was, where can I find the cancellations? So all these tabs here, as you know, are ways to configure your property, right? on additional information and policies is where you will find at least instant bookable, right? Here is where you can select this information. And here is where you can make adjustments on the cancellation policy, right? So these are the cancellation policies that we have available for Vrbo, right? So these are the ones that are mapped through the API, the ones that they accept, right? As you can see, there is a no refund one, right? So if you have the only listing in an island, right, that only that has a high demand, right? This kind of thing is like, yeah, of course, you can use the most strict one because people still want to stay at your property, and you have the only one that is offering, something like that, right? So again, it depends on your competition. Can I use no refund in that case? Yeah, sure. And you still would be probably close to 100% occupancy. So that's best of the world, right? But that's not the case for everyone, right? Many of you have a strong competition, many new entrants in the market. So yeah, we have to fight for inches, on improvements, right? So then you can be very strict, relaxed, moderate, firm, right? So I recommend not to, go too crazy, but if your occupancy is low, I would be more on the moderate for sure, right? I also got this question, which one should I use? Yeah, I'm not the one to say, I can just recommend, right? So if you're struggling to get reservations, your occupancy is not as high as you would like, I would go more on the moderate side, right? Uh, Relaxed, right? So these two here would be the ideal ones for you, right? As for the streak goes, right? If you can sell your property, have a high occupancy, still using more strict cancellation policies, that's fine as well, right? So there is no right or wrong. You know, the overall, is the rule of thumb is how is your revenue per available room, right? How are you doing? Combination of ADR, average daily rate, and occupancy. That's one of the main metrics for short-term rental, right? So I would pay attention on that. If your occupancy is not too high, and you're not able to increase your ADR, okay, maybe it's time to lose, cancellation policies, this kind of thing, to become more attractive, right? Of course, photos and everything else that we can use, promotion, like new listing promotion, that's a big one as well. All right. Okay, so thanks for the question. Yeah, Anonymous asked about instant bookable. I just shared here. Okay. Now, there is more of a comment here than a question. Okay, Vrbo does not permit same-day booking, right? Can Hostaway recommend to Vrbo to consider host to control same-day opt-in or opt-out? Okay, Patel, not so much of a question, but a request, right? So yes, of course, we always share the feedback, with the channels, but at the end of the day, it is up to them to decide, right? What we try to do is to make your experience using the channel as seamless as possible, right? But at the end of the day, if their API, right, which is the software interface that they create, for us to integrate does not allow certain thing, yeah, there isn't much that we can do. Feedback, yes, of course, we can give this feedback. Thank you, Patel. You're not the first one, to mention that. Don't know the real reason behind it, but sometimes I try not to spend too much time thinking on why. I try to think on why when I'm discussing here, right? So why? Now, why they do not accept? Try not to spend too much time. Try to focus on how to improve, how to take advantages on the way that they work. And of course, I always share the feedback. Appreciate it. Okay. Constantine is giving me the feedback that still hasn't got reservations from Vrbo. So I'm assuming that you are new on the channel. I hope you're using, everything that we are sharing here. Many of these things might have a relation to what you're doing, and I hope you improve, and I can help in any way. Stephen here is mentioning that some amenities are not syncing as expected. Stephen, I recommend you, and actually anyone here on this call, right? Cases like that, create a ticket, right? We don't have now, in general, no, we don't have any syncing problem. As a matter of fact, we have one of the best integrations with Vrbo. That's why we are an elite partner, right? So we are not any partner. We are a partner that has been certified at the highest level, right? We always implement firsthand every API they have. They released the review API. We were the first to integrate. They released the inbox API. We were the first one to integrate. So syncing is not a problem. Yeah, I don't know how long you've been using, Vrbo 2 API, but it's they sync every 24 hours, right? So, and this pushes all the information. That's the way that they work. So I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but if you're having one specific issue, and in order to better understand your question, I recommend you to email support, use need help, and then submit a request and give a specific, right? So specify which listing ID are you talking about, which amenity are you trying to sync, why is not syncing, right? So what exactly were you expecting and what is happening in return? Because then, instead of giving a generic answer, like I'm giving now, yeah, we don't have any issues. Someone can be specific on your case and say, oh, I see what you're seeing. Okay, maybe your expectation with that shouldn't be like that because I don't know, X, Y, and Z. I don't know yet, and I do not open anybody's dashboard, during this kind of office hours, right? For privacy concerns. Okay. Gabby's asking here if we update pictures on, and by the way, thank you everyone for the questions, right? So Stephen, Constantine, Gabby. Gabby saying here, if we update pictures on Hostaway, will they also update on Vrbo? Yes, right? Yes. It's just if I had to put a comparison, between Vrbo and Airbnb updates, the main difference would be time, that it takes to update, right? So right now, the way it works is if you change anything here, Hostaway, let's say, for example, checkout time, I want to change the checkout time to 10 o'clock, and then I save. You always have the option to save or save and export, right? This is not connected to Airbnb, so that's why it's not showing, this option. But if you are connected, most of you are connected to Airbnb. If you modify something, it will show you save and export. If it is Airbnb, it goes in real time, right? Real time meaning we start pushing the information, and of course, they're going to update on their end, right? So, and it happens right away. If it is with Vrbo, you modify including the pictures, right? You modify the pictures here, on media, and it will be updated once they run a batch every 24 hours, right? So in up to 24 hours, things will get modified, right? And then I also recommended to add captions, right? Actually, use captions for Airbnb, captions for Vrbo, for booking, I would always use captions in any way. Okay, thank you for the question. Now, questions about amenities. Now let's go back here. Amenities, right? So even though this is just one tab, it is giant internally, right? So we are talking about a lot of information. We have literally hundreds of fields here, that can be used, right? So when I was telling you about location, for example, location time. Can you imagine you having, a property by the beach and you're not taking advantage? Even worse, let's say it's a beachfront, right? So if that's not the most important information of your listing, I don't know what is, right? So this adds value. This is what makes people, book your property to begin with, right? So you see, there is another one. So this one is only mapped to Vrbo, right? This one is mapped to Airbnb, Vrbo. So also have take that into consideration, right? Maybe you imported your listing from Airbnb and it brought the fields that were mapped to Airbnb will remain mapped, right? So we'll bring that. But Vrbo has additional fields, that are not mapped together. For example, golf course front. That's a specific one for Vrbo. Pay attention to this kind of thing because you may be missing opportunities on Vrbo, just because some other channel is not using that, right? So and as you can see, lake, lakefront, lake view, right? Mountain view, ocean front. So many important information, people are looking for places to stay, and you may be missing, this guest that is filtering by that, right? So attractions, right? You see many activities nearby your property that people could be looking for, and you're not promoting it, right? So there is no way that Vrbo will find out unless you inform. And this is the way to inform the channel. Of course, description helps, but this is one of the main ones, right? That you can have, right? So shopping, there are many things, outdoor, sports, and so on. As you notice, this is giant, right? So some people forget to put the kitchen, kitchen information, or even, uh, for example, information like internet, right? So how come? And it's very common to see people missing internet, missing Wi-Fi information. So that's that's 101, right? Don't. If you're doing, please stop, pay attention here. That could be a giant one, right? One that I haven't mentioned, but is right here, the second tab is markups, right? So markup, what it does is it adds a price, it adds a percentage on the top of the calendar price, right? So what is the maximum that you can put here? There is no limit, right? How should I use? Each one uses in a different way. Most of my clients that use markups, they use to offset the commission that the channel is charging, right? So that's a use, but I see people using like 20%. Like, this is not a commission, right? If you add too much markup here, you might be missing why your price is getting too high at the front end, for the guest to book, right? So always review your markups and make sure that you don't have too much margin here, which could be good, from profit analysis, but at the same time, your listing could be more expensive than your competitors, right? So careful there, right? So I'll always review the markup. So people put it at the beginning, when they're getting on board. Oh, that's a good thing they use, and then they forget to come back. Don't forget to come back. This is part of your maintenance, right? Reviewing the listings, reviewing markups, reviewing amenities, right? By the way, let's say, for example, you're managing, you know, several different properties, right? So if you add an information here, let's say air conditioning, right? We can bulk edit this information, right? So I can use like air conditioning. You can type something like internet, for example, here, and you can push this information to your different listings, right? So this is possible. I can even select all and push to all the listings, right? So this is the kind of thing that it's not that you have to go listing by listing to do the maintenance, of things, right? But if you buy new appliances, you have to come here and you have to check the box, that you have the appliances or things that you have, right? So don't forget to do that, right? And the other way around as well, right? Something is broken, and do not have intention to replace anytime soon, remove, right? Just in case, right? That nobody's booking, for example, because of a swimming pool, right? But the swimming pool is broken. Yeah, you can see that this is not going to go well, when it comes to reviews, right? So we all been there. Okay, go over some more questions here. Okay, Logan. Logan is asking me a question. Should properties that are consistently fully booked have a flexible or a strict cancellation policy? Well, Logan, if you're fully booked, you can go strict, right? Because the main reason why you would go flexible is because you want to attract more people, to come to your property. But now, if you're fully booked, you don't have to be flexible, right? You can just be strict because people still will book you. So the advantage of that is if anybody cancels, uh you get the full amount of the reservation, right? Without needing to refund the guest. So business wise, it makes more sense to be on the strict side, right? So, but at the same time, I don't know if you're fully booked on flexible, right? And you want to migrate with a strict, you might be careful on that, right? If you're strict and you're still fully booked, then I wouldn't recommend you to modify to flexible, right? But if you're on flexible and fully booked, I would just be careful, not to uh, uh, to keep potential guests, to stay away from your property because they're booking because of your flexibility, right? So it all depends, right? So long story short, it depends. If you're already on the street, don't modify, right? So you don't have to. The advice goes more to people that are complaining, oh, I'm not getting, as many reservations as I expected. My occupancy is low. Those guys, they have to change things, right? So you have to fine tune your listing until you find the sweet spot. If you're fully booked, you are on the sweet spot, right? So why would you change? Thanks for the question. Okay, David is asking additional questions about how does it work between Vrbo and Expedia, right? So it's not that everything that you have on Vrbo will be displayed anyway on Expedia. It's not like that, right? It's upon demand. If there is a demand from a guest, or guests looking for a property, with the same characteristics of yours, and Expedia doesn't have an inventory or do not have enough inventory on a specific area, for example, right? Or the amenities that they're filtering, they're looking for, maybe only a short-term rental. Let's say, for example, kitchen. Let's put it like that, right? So someone is looking for a specific location, there aren't many hotels, and even the hotels are not offering kitchens, right? Why am I saying hotels? Because Booking.com and especially Expedia, not so much Booking.com because short-term rental is also on Booking.com, right? But Expedia is specialized in hotels. So maybe they don't have, hotel rooms, that offer kitchen. So very likely they will display on their inventory, display to the guest listings from Vrbo that have kitchen, right? That's how it works. So it's not like all the inventory, it's just transposed, from Vrbo to Expedia. That's not how it works. It is upon demand. Okay. But you're saying that you want to use Expedia directly. It's possible with Hostaway. You can have it both, right? I'm just saying for clients that are looking, they just joined Hostaway and sometimes they said, yeah, but I wanted to have Expedia. Okay, that's up to Expedia, if they will accept your listing, directly. But if you have an account with Expedia, by all means, right? So you can have both integrations, right? So you can have it on Expedia and on Vrbo, right? Regardless of the instant bookable, because you can list there, right? But that's up to the channel to approve, right? So, but if you can have it on both, you could have it, right? So that's something that's entirely up to you. Thanks for the question. Okay, William is asking me, okay, it's a little off topic in relation to Vrbo, but okay, I can explain to you quickly here, even because we are on the same page, right? So you're asking about combination of rooms, right? So for example, and this one Swan Lake here, right? So let me increase the size, right? So it's a double bedroom, right? So you can have a single bedroom one and single bedroom two. So you have to create like a parent-child listing so that you can rent. Okay, let me go to the calendar. The calendar can become, this is a multi-unit. It's not the same. This one is the one that we're talking about, right? So you can have reservations on the parent listing. Okay, so that's not exactly how it works, you know. So disconsider a little bit this calendar here because this is a test account, right? So because why am I saying that? If you have, oh no, it's all right. I'm sorry, it is correct. So this is the entire house, right? So it gets blocked, right? So once you get one reservation for one of the rooms, it blocks the entire house. If you get the reservation for another room, you know, it also blocks the house, right? So, but if you get one reservation here, it doesn't block the other room. Okay, so that's the important part, right? So you can have, for example, if it was a minimum of one night, I could still book the entire house. So that's how it works, right? So you should create a child-parent relationship between entire house and rooms. Okay, that's the best way to do it. Okay, questions about payment. Yeah, we discussed that, right? So payments, how to set up the payments. This, you go to gas payment, right here on gas payments. Here we will see everything, what's going on, and then we have the automation, and then on the automation, right? If you want to create one, well, first of all, if you're asking me that, I'm assuming that it is still being onboarded, right? Because your onboarding specialist should help you with that, right? So we don't expect everything that I'm sharing here. That's why I go kind of quickly on some things because I'm sharing best practices. But how to get it done, you should have seen on onboarding. And the same way that I recommended our colleague here, you know, to go over email support for something that he believes is not working well, you know, so that someone can investigate and give advice. You can also ask questions, right, on how to get things done and for example, but I can show you that's a quick one, right? So you just add an auto payment here, and then you select Vrbo, and then you determine if you want to. This would be like 100% at the moment the reservation is created, right? So that's the case that I was explaining. But you are all. It is also possible, you know, some clients they just divide like 50% at the moment of the reservation and the remaining payment, you know, to be done maybe 14 days before the check-in, right? So that's also common. So there are different ways of setting up, right? So you set up here and this information will be pushed to Vrbo, right? So that's fine. Now, not sure if that's the question that you were asking, but just to connect to what we were talking, you know, here on the explanation, you can charge 100%. Again, if you have full occupancy, you know, our colleague here, you know, again, you can charge 100% the moment the reservation is created and save it as a non-refundable rate, for example, right? So on the cancellation policy, not a rate, but the cancellation policy. So you can be very strict, you know, it all depends on how's your business doing. All right. Okay. Question here also from Logan. With a strict policy, is it possible to make exceptions for guests? Yes, of course, right? So being lenient, right? Being flexible, that's always possible, right? The other way around is not a true, right? So that's what you have to be careful with, right? So if if someone booked at a cancellation policy non-refundable, for example, It is possible to refund the guest, yes, because maybe you want to have this guest coming back in a couple of months and then becoming loyal to you and coming, for the rest of their lives, every vacation or every Thanksgiving, they show up to spend the weekend, for example. Yes. And it's recommended to be flexible, right? But you don't have to. That's the advantage. But the other way around, if you provide the flexible policy, right? And then someone wants to be inflexible as a guest, you still have to comply, right? So it is at the end of the day, you can always be more on the strict side and be flexible, but not the other way around. Be flexible and then decide that you don't want to cancel, right? That you don't want to refund the gas. That's not possible. I mean, it is possible, but you're gonna get penalized by the channel, right? So that's not recommended at all. Okay, Roberto is asking a very good question. So once the listings are imported from Airbnb, does it import all the amenities, cancellation policies? Yes, but I recommend you to review everything, right? Because like I said, some of the things that were connected, were mapped to Airbnb, not necessarily are the same fields that are used by Vrbo, right? So I recommend you to review as soon as you import, review, go over all your data. Like I showed you, right? Just I just showed like a couple of minutes ago, right? Some fields are not mapped, and Vrbo has some additional fields that were not available on Airbnb. You may be missing, right? Maybe you have a very good value, that you could be recommending your guests, potential guests, and you're not even promoting that, right? So that's a big one. And I would review all the amenities, especially the amenities, but cancellation policies and check-in, check-out time. So yeah, everything will be imported, but not necessarily they are the same fields that you need to have on Vrbo, right? That would be the case. Okay, Rebecca is asking, what is a good markup? Hmm. Uh, Again, the good markup, in my opinion, is zero, right? Because then you're applying the calendar price, right? So you calculate your price to have it on the calendar, right? So whatever is on the calendar, it is the price that will be displayed on the channel. That's my recommendation, right? But like I mentioned, right? Some clients they like to offset the commission that is charged by the channel. So you can use that. Let's say, for example, Vrbo in USA is usually around 5%, right? Usually 5%. So in that case, you can put five, you know, and that's it. So, but there is no recommendation of markup, right? So use it if you must, right? Because assuming that you have calculated, very carefully the price that you have on your calendar, just because of that, right? Question about how to push changes to all listings. Well, if it is on Vrbo, all you have to do is save it, right? So it will eventually, because like I said, right? So they they run a batch and they collect all this information, at once. So up to 24 hours, it will be updated, right? If it is on Airbnb, you click the button save and export, and it starts right away. But it's when you hit the save button, just always click on save and export because it will update Airbnb right away and Vrbo, uh, in a window of 24 hours. Okay, I got here from Anonymous, last question because we're running out of time, but a very important one, We noticed a slowdown in bookings. Wow, depending on the market that you are, right? So we have property managers, all over the world, right? So let's be very, very, very specific. Depending on the region, it could vary. Some regions are doing better than last year. Many regions, that were booming on during COVID, are getting less bookings because the number of new listings that are entering the market, it's higher than the number of guests entering the market. So it depends if your market is saturated or not, right? So not necessarily blame the channel. That's what I'm saying, right? Try to read as much as possible about your specific market. How is it going? And when I'm talking about your market, is your state, if it is USA, for example, right? Canadian provinces. Well, so it will behave in a different way. Your city may behave in a different way. If it is uh, a tourist place, it will behave in a way. If it is a business, will behave. For example, I noticed some very busy places, that business side was not doing so well, before because of COVID, and all the culture from work from anywhere, and tourism was booming. I can see, business, picking up a little bit more, than tourism, depending on the place again, right? Because there are many new entrants in the market. So that's why it's very important that you fine tune your listings, and I also always bring competition, to pay attention to your competition, see what your competitors are doing in your micro region as well, right? So it is important to understand how is the country market doing, how is the state market, how's the city, and more specifically, your micro region, how is it doing, right? And then take your decision because it's not the same for everyone, right? Some areas are doing very, very well, right? And some of them not so much. And then it's not only about the channel, right? Because we're talking about Vrbo. The vast majority of my clients are growing on Vrbo, right? So it's an excellent channel to get more reservations on short-term rental. Okay, so uh yeah, that's okay. One more question. I guess Patel here is asking, okay, I found that Expedia does not support two-way message. Yeah, they do not have an API for that, right? So that's why it's not integrated, and that's why they share the guest personal email, right? Not an email like Airbnb and Vrbo they share because they use the API. So it's a different game, right? So again, we work with what's available, right? They don't have the API, but we have a way to collect, the email. They share the guest email, and it goes to the guest email. Not ideal experience, but it is what it is available. All right. And well, I have to close here. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate all the questions, your engagement. It makes it, way more interesting. Thank you very much, and I see you next week. Bye. And by tomorrow, you're going to get, the recording of this call. Bye. Have a good week.